Hi everybody, welcome back. I'm Strategy Professor, and today we're going to be looking at the 8.13 tier list. If you want to find access to this Google Doc, you can look in the description, and I'll also have timestamps so you can jump around to your favorite parts as well. If you didn't check out my explanation for kind of the wacky bottom lane, then be sure to check out that video. I've got it linked in the Google Doc here, and I'll also have a link to the 8.12 patch notes to be able to check that out as well. Now, I'm trying to learn some video editing. It's taken a bit longer than I thought to figure out how to do what I wanted to do, so hopefully I'll have that ready by the next cycle of patch material. So look forward to that in a couple of weeks. But we're just going to stick with the old-fashioned style here for this one. As always, the methodology, I'm talking to a plat-minus audience. This is not intended to be a pro player patch notes analysis, nor a challenger level patch notes analysis. That's going to be a little bit different in terms of which champions are viable. You know, some champions that work really well with highly coordinated teams are going to be sometimes a little bit ranked lower, such as Tahm, and Braum that you might see in pro play, than other champions that are just really good at the Clown Fiesta, that work really well in disorganized play. Someone like, you know, maybe Brand or Leona will have a bit more priority than they would have in a pro-level game. So just keep that in mind as well. This is also intended for non-specialists, so if you're a one-trick Thresh player, then you can still be very, very effective. This is just for a broader audience that doesn't necessarily have a ton of experience on each champion. And then I'll talk more specifically about the potential of a champion rather than just the raw stats. So this is not just going to be a laundry list of let's go down the statistics and see who's winning the best, but I'll also look at, you know, how does a champion fit into the meta? How does their kit work? Who do they synergize with? Who do they get countered by? So that's all really important as well. Then when we go through each pick, I have a mini Google Doc that I just clicked on, and you can find this and access this yourself in the regular Google Doc. If you're ever wondering, you know, what does a strategy professor recommend in terms of runes, items, and all that kind of stuff, then you can always click right on that little mini Google Doc and it'll tell you. In here, I also have a little rating system that I developed a couple weeks ago. It's 1 through 5, 1 being one of the weakest champions in that particular category, and 5 being one of the strongest champions in that category, and then everywhere in between. So lane pressure just means how likely is this champion able to exert their will in the lane? How likely are they going to be able to do what they want to do in the lane, right? Whether that's push, try to kill people, position the wave in a certain way. How likely are they going to be able to do that? Kill threat is how likely are they to get kills, specifically in the laning phase, but also outside of the laning phase. Will this champion get a lot of kills as the game goes on often? Safety, and this one's really important in a meta that's still defined by assassins and camping the bottom lane, is how safe is the champion, right? How likely are they to die to ganks? How easy is it for them to misposition? Do they have different defensive itemizations or defensive skills to help them out in tough situations? Scaling, how well does the champion do as the game progresses? Do they have things that make them better as the game goes on, right? So they have really low cooldowns with powerful abilities. Are they able to get items that synergize really well with each other? You know, kind of like the famous Ardent Sense or Redemption Mikhail's, which has been nerfed, but is still pretty strong because they all synergize very well with each other. And finally, I have reliability. How likely is the champion going to be able to do what they want to do, right, as the game goes on? So this is both mechanical in the sense that does the champion have a lot of skill shots? Is it easy for the player to mess up the champion when they're playing them? But then also, more theoretically, how easy is the champion to counter? How likely is the champion just not going to be in a very good place overall in the meta, right? And so it's both, you know, kind of up to the player in terms of consistency. How difficult is the champion to play, but then also, you know, how easy is it for the enemy to make sure the champion doesn't do what they want to do. Okay, so let's go ahead and get in here. I'm going to move a little bit faster. You know, just looking at it mathematically, if I really want to realistically and not in a meme way get this down to 30 minutes, and I'm trying to cover, you know, 15 champions here and then honorable mentions, I really have to go about 1 minute per champion. And then I'll slow down and talk a little bit more about ones that move significantly, but champions that are still in relatively the same spot as they were last week, I'm not going to talk about them as much. If you do want more of an in-depth kind of guide and explanation for why certain champions are strong, I have a guide for a lot of these champions, so be sure to check it out. If I do have a guide, it'll be linked at the bottom of the Google Doc. And that'll give you kind of usually an hour-long version of explanation of skills, items, where they fit into the meta, how you should play them theoretically, all that kind of stuff. So if you want the slower, you know, more in-depth version, then be sure to check that out. So I feel like every week, part of what makes these videos take so long is that I go over sort of square one of each champion and explain all about them every single time. So it's great for newer people, but at the same time, it can scare off newer people because it's a longer video. So it's kind of a catch-22. It's great for people not familiar with the channel that want to hear the details that haven't heard that before, but it's also kind of bad because it's going to be too long and it's going to scare those people off from listening in the first place. And longtime viewers will have heard that same speech on most of these champions probably a dozen times. Okay, so let's look at Rakan. Still going to be in the top of the list. I talk about him all the time. If I would just one-trick him, I would probably have a lot more elo right now. I do like to play a lot of variety on the stream, but if you're not opposed to gaining a lot of elo, I highly recommend playing a lot of Rakan. You're seeing him in pro play. Now, statistically, in solo queue, like, his numbers aren't going to pop out at you. He's only got about a 50% win rate. But part of that is because he is somewhat challenging to play. His mechanics aren't that difficult, but the decisions are somewhat tricky with him. So Rakan is near the top because he's just so versatile. He's good in almost every team comp. And the reason for that is he's extremely safe. He's the safest support in the game at this point, especially with the nerfs to Janna. The reason for that is he has 3 different dashes, basically. So he's got his W, which is a free dash you can do anywhere, anytime. Then he has his E, which are 2 more dashes to allied champions to help you reposition in fights. Then he also has quickness, which allows him to, in a pinch, he can even run away if he has to. If an assassin gets on him, he can cast this, tap him, and then run away really fast. So he has 3 different sort of dashes and 3 separate abilities that give him some kind of ability to run away. He also has a really big shield that he gets with like a 0.9 AP ratio, so that kind of protects him. And he can itemize defensively if he has to. So he can get a Zeke's, which he's very good with, which I've explained in past videos. And he can get other things like a... how am I blanking out on the name? He can get other defensive items if he has to, although usually he doesn't get that many more defensive items. So he has just really good versatility, and if you don't need the defense, you can go offense. You can go Ardent Sensor with the Zeke's to kind of double down on your the damage from your AD carry. If you have a team fight comp and you don't really have an AD carry that's going to benefit from Zeke's or Ardent Sensor, so if you have like a Vladimir bot or a like a Brand bot or something like that, you can still go kind of the classic Redemption Locket build if you want to. Or you can go Knight's Vow, that's what I was thinking of earlier, which is really good with some of these bruisers as well, if you need to go Knight's Vow at some point. So he's just extremely versatile. You can even go like damage on him if you want. I don't recommend that most of the time, but people that had been playing in mid lane had been going things like, you know, Protobell Witchbane to have him do a lot of burst damage. You can do that. I don't recommend that a lot as support, but if your team really needs AP damage, if you have 4 AD champions on your team and you picked Rakan first pick, then everyone else picks AD, you do have damage options if you want, because he has okay ratios. He's got a 0.7 on his W. He's got a 0.8 on his E. Remember, this goes, you can use this twice too. So the shield ends up being a 1.6 AP ratio with a 280 base shield. That's huge. When you think of a shield like Janna's, it's 210 with a 0.7. So he has one of the biggest shields in the game. Extremely mobile. Like, his only real drawbacks are that he's pretty weak in the lane overall, and Gleaming Quill is not insane. It's pretty hard to hit consistently. It does okay damage, but it's not amazing, and it doesn't really synergize with the rest of his kit very well. It's the one thing that doesn't give him a lot of mobility. And a lot of his things have really long cooldowns early on in the game, right? So his shield has a 20 base cooldown. His W has an 18 base cooldown. So you really want to get points into both of these. So they're highly encouraging you not to go a lot of points in queue if you want the maximum mobility and teamfight impact later on in the game. But, you know, it can do okay damage early. It does have a heal component to it as well. Now keep in mind the heal component doesn't scale at all with levels. If you just have 1 point in this, it's going to heal the same amount every time. So unless you think you're going to be doing a lot of damage in the laning phase, if you're just going to be throwing a Q and hitting somebody once per minute or something with it, or even once per, you know, 30 seconds with it, then it's probably not going to be worth it to get points in this. Because just, you know, hitting it every now and then will still give you the heal, and you're not going to be able to apply enough damage for it to matter over time consistently. So, yeah, you just have to ask yourself and think, how often am I going to be able to hit this Q? Is my ally going to be able to follow up and do some reasonable damage. So if you have an AD carry, it's just going to sit there and watch you try to harass, then it may not be worth it to do multiple points in Gleaming Quill. However, if you have like a Draven or something that wants to go all in and try to kill people, then you know, going in with your W and then using the Gleaming Quill could be a pretty good burst of damage that would also give you a heal. I would argue, however, that even if you're trying to do an all-in build like that, where you just want to go in and kill people, then getting multiple points in W yields the same amount of damage as you would have if you put points in Q. Right, so if you have 3 points in W at level 5 when you go all in, that's 160 damage off your W, it's 160 damage off your Q. And the heal is the exact same. So what's the difference? Well, you get a slightly lower cooldown, you get a 3-second lower cooldown. Versus this, it's also a 3-second lower cooldown, but I would add that this has a lot more utility as the game goes on, because it's your crowd control. You can do it a lot more as fights go on. So that's why I think I've gone back to getting 3 points in W. Just because, like, this is the only time this is superior is if you are landing it on cooldown as poke in the landing phase, right? If you're actually hitting it every 9 seconds on the dot, if it's not taking you an additional 3 seconds to hit it. So just go back, watch some replays of yourself, and just see, okay, how often am I hitting this Gleaming Quill, right? If you're hitting it pretty much every time, then maybe you can get some more points in it. But if you're missing it a lot, if you're only hitting it once every 30 seconds or so, that little bit of extra damage is probably not going to matter that much. Also, if they have sustain in their lane, if they have a Soraka or a Sona or a Nami, or if you're against the Vladimir or something like that, then the poke's probably not going to matter that much either. Okay. So, overall, I'm recommending, because I'm changing sort of the style up and maxing the W again, I'm recommending Guardian, Bone Plating, Chrysalis, Revitalize. And then once you get after that, it's kind of up to you. I had been getting Celerity and Nimbus Cloak because I thought those were really good. And they are. They did nerf Celerity recently. You do get some extra AP when you're going in with your ult and you W. Off of Celerity, you know, you're going to get like an extra, whatever, 20 AP, maybe 25 AP for like 1 or 2 seconds. It's okay. It's okay. But I've started going back towards Zombie Ward and Ulti Hunter, and the reason for that is strictly just people don't buy Vision at all. At least in the ELO that I'm playing in, which is like low platinum right now. And so I think that just having the extra ward coverage off a Zombie Ward is amazing. Especially early on, even though they nerf Zombie Ward, having 30 more seconds of that River Ward stay up before you can get your Ancient Coin finish, your Nomad's Medallion, before you get those wards, you know, that first 10 minutes of the game is really, really important. You know, it helps keep an eye on that Scuttle area for you. It can help keep an eye on their buff area if you can get a deep ward in there. So having those Zombie Wards is very nice, and it's pretty good later on in the game as well. So, you know, yeah, you're giving up Nimbus Cloak and Celerity for that, but having more vision so that you don't get ganked as easily. Like, Rakan has pretty good gank defense, but your AD carry is probably still going to die in a gank. So that's important to note. And then the introduction of Ulti Hunter gives you a nice option if you're not going to use multiple item actives. So if you're going to go for like a Zeke's, which doesn't benefit from the active that much, the item cooldown, because you're waiting on your ulti anyways. You know, if you're going to go something like a Zeke's Knight's Vow or a Zeke's Ardent Censer, then Ingenious Hunter isn't necessarily the greatest, and so having this other option of Ulti Hunter is pretty nice, because that ends up giving you 15% more cooldown on your ult, which is obviously a huge high-impact ult that should give you a kill almost every time it's off cooldown. So I think having these two is a pretty good combination, although I will, you know, say that that is in the minority. A lot of people don't get that, at least on pro builds, because people in Challenger know how to ward. People in Platinum, Gold, Silver, Bronze don't ward as much as they should. So that's why, you know, maybe I'm sacrificing a little bit of power, but having that individual power, but having that intel is really, really important. So other options here, yeah, you could do the Celerity Nimbus. People, you could also go something like Boots Cosmic Insight. It's a pretty good bargain. Each one of those is about a 400 gold value, so that's kind of like the greediest version that you can get, which is pretty strong. You could get a stopwatch if you really wanted to, if they have like a Zed or something and you want to get stopwatch. I don't know what you would turn it into later. You can just sell it, but stopwatch is still really powerful. You could go like stopwatch, Cosmic Insight. And those are probably the choices that I'd stick with. I wouldn't do anything from the precision tree. But yeah, those are good options. You know, if you really like having that harassment with the Q early, if you think you land a lot of Qs, you just have to imitate what the Challenger people are doing, then you can go for the standard, you know, Airy, Nimbus Cloak, Celerity, Scorch, and then you would go Bone Plating and Chrysalis as your secondaries. Now, I've been running Nomad, Ionian, and then often I'll go Zeke and Ardent, and then maybe a Redemption or a Locket, but this is very fluid. It just depends. If you don't have a traditional AD carry, or you have something like a Misfortune or a Jhin who's not going to benefit that much from Ardent, then you might want to get something else second, right? You could get a Knight's Vow or Redemption or a Locket. So that's just something to think about there. And you could also go Mobility Boots instead of Ionian. I really like getting that CDR as fast as possible, but you know, having that extra speed from Mobility Boots can be really helpful in the kind of Clown Fiesta meta that we're in right now. Okay, so a lot of time on Rakan, but he is number 1, so I just wanted to go over him a pretty good chunk here. All right, Brand. Close that out here. Brand I have up at number 2 so far, and it's just kind of hard to deny his power right now. Like, he's really strong. And a lot of the reason is, like, even if he falls behind, he still has a really high impact in team fights just because he can just press R. Like, it's literally, I've played so many games where we dumpster a Brand in lane when I'm playing something else, and then just when the team fight rolls around, he just presses R when there's 5 people around and still just, you know, takes everyone to half health. Especially at lower ranks, if you're playing in silver, gold, bronze, even in platinum, people just don't spread out for his ult. Everyone groups up, and now you're seeing more bruisers than ever. You're even seeing some bruisers in the bot lane, right? You know, sometimes you're against Mordekaiser bot lane, or a Yasuo bot lane, or Irelia bot lane, or whatever, or an Irelia mid lane. Well, we may not get the stats here, but the more melee champions they have on their team, the stronger Brand is going to be. And he did get some pretty good boosts over the last year in terms of his damage output. Specifically, I think his passive does more damage than it used to. So he does a lot. You know, his all-in in lane is really strong if you land that full combo. He's very good at harassing under the tower. And, you know, they're going to die. If you hit them with that stun in lane, they're probably going to die. And then he has some play against assassins. Like, he can get that stun. If you E somebody, then Q him, you can get that stun, potentially. Now, the reason that I've started to favor him over Zyra is just because he has more uptime on his spells. Apparently, it's not going to show us that today. Let me see if I can go in through the normal thing. Sometimes with that link, it kind of bugs out a little bit. See if I click on it here. See if it'll load up. No, it's still not wanting to load up today. Awesome. But, like, with Zyra, you're waiting on her plants. You really have to have plants to do damage. And the plants, you know, even if you level up your W second, the plants are going to still take you somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 to 15 seconds to get another plant. So effectively your cooldowns, all of your cooldowns become 10 to 15 seconds because your spells without plants are terrible. Just spamming your Q just really doesn't do anything if there aren't any plants around. Whereas, and, you know, I guess those plants are a damaging spell that you wait on. Like, they augment the other spells, but they don't do anything by themselves. Whereas, like, each one of Brand's abilities does, you know, damage and stacks his passive, and they're all on a relatively low cooldown. I don't remember exactly what it is, and apparently we're not going to figure that out here today, but I feel like all of his abilities are 10 seconds or less. And then once you get a little bit of CDR, it gets even lower than that. So I just feel like he has a lot more uptime. He has a much better panic button. You know, if you get jumped on by the assassin in a team fight, like I said, you just press R, and that's pretty much most of your damage anyways, a lot of times in fights. So he's pretty foolproof. With a ton of all-in potential. So that's why I move Brand up a little bit. It's just like, with Zyra, if they jump on you, yeah, you can R, but it's not going to do nearly as much damage as Brand's R unless you get plants on him. So you have to hit him with the E, then hit a Q, 2 Ws, and then an R. So you basically have to press 4 buttons to get the same kind of effect as Brand pressing 1 button. And a lot of times with some of these assassins, they kill you so quickly you can't even get all those buttons off. So like Rengar jumps on you, you know, you're not going to be able to E, W, W, Q, you know, R. Brand's a lot less skill, like, he is skill shot reliant in the sense that you have to hit your Q, but like with Zyra, you really have to hit that E, or your ult's just not going to do anything because people can just run out of it. Whereas with Brand's R, you know, it makes it much more difficult to, you know, make that ability not work, right, in team fights. You do want to be careful around champions like Braum or like Yasuo because they can absorb the entire ult with the wind wall or with Braum's shield. So that's important to keep in mind. But other than that, I think he's just very strong. So I've moved him up a little bit more than that just because he has a lot of kill threat in lane. And he's just a lot easier to execute than other champions right now. And so I think that makes him pretty strong as the game goes on. So you still want to go Comet. You can go Airy early on if you want to. Airy is better guaranteed damage early, but it's less burst damage later. Both are good. You know, the dot on his ultimate can trigger Airy multiple times in a fight if people keep getting hit by the dots. But each dot tick also does lower the cooldown of Comet, so your Comet's going to be up more often. Then you just really want to get Sorcerer Boots, and then Rylai, Leandri, Void Staff. It's kind of the combo there. I have tried getting Luden's Echo on him. I don't really think you need that as support. You're already going to get some mana regen off of your Eye of the Watchers, and if you're just not spamming your abilities all the time, you should be kind of okay on mana for a little bit. You can get Luden's if you want. You know, the CDR is very nice. The Luden's passive is nice, but giving up that damage off of Rylai's and Leandri's combination is pretty rough. So that's what I would go most of the time. So once again, he doesn't have any like real CDR in his core build, which is annoying, but he doesn't need it as badly as Zyra because his stuff is on a lower cooldown. So I think he's a really, really strong pick right now. Morgana's another one. She's still going to be really strong. She has been for several patches. I haven't played her because I ban her most of the time. I want to play Rakan, but I might give her a whirl again. She's even seeing some professional play. Okay, here we go. We can get Morgana. So it's kind of the same deal that it has been. Like, the big thing with Morgana is she can build. She's versatile with her build, kind of like Rakan, where she can build tanky a little bit if she has to. The reason for that is she has really high utility, in the sense that her Dark Binding roots people for 3 seconds, which is absurd. I mean, that's like almost twice as long as most other CC in the game. And it starts off on an 11-second cooldown. Now, it doesn't scale down at all, but that is very strong. Really, really strong. And it does a lot of damage. You know, 300 base damage with a 0.9 ratio. So it can do quite a bit of damage, but it's that 3-second root is just like absurdly powerful. Now, it is a pretty slow-moving skill shot, but it has a pretty large hitbox as well. So it's not the easiest skill to hit in the world against competent players, but it's also not the hardest. You know, it's okay. Tormented Soil is pretty garbage most of the time, but you can use it to push. You know, push the lane early on as support. So that can be helpful if you're in a push lane. And then Black Shield, of course, is great. Now, it's not going to help against some of the 80 assassins out there, right? So it's not going to help a lot against like Zed, Talon, things like that, because it doesn't block any physical damage. But it does stop CC from affecting some of your hyper assassins, right? So if you have a fed Yi on your team, or you have a fed, you know, Fizz or Katarina or whatever, putting the Black Shield on them is going to make them almost impossible to stop. And, you know, it does block quite a bit of magic damage as the game goes on. Then she has a pretty low cooldown ult. It's not the highest impact ult in the game, but it does do some pretty good damage. You know, 1.4 ratio with a 300 base at level 6 is quite a lot. It's decent if you flash onto them, you know, and you can have that stick to them. Now, Hourglass is very good, too, because the Soul Shackles, of course, stays on them with Hourglass. So that allows her to build an armor item, which is really important. She can also get Zeke's, because this is on such a low cooldown. It does slow people down so that your AD carry can still run after them. So I think it's okay. She's okay. Like, she has the long stun. She has the utility off her E. Her ult's, like, alright on a low cooldown. She has pretty high base damages. So she has a pretty versatile build path. So I think that makes her pretty good. And she's very good against, like I said, Rakan and some of these other like hard engage champs like Thresh, Blitz, Nautilus. As long as you can Black Shield fast enough to stop that engage, then it's going to be very strong. Now, the nerfing of other enchanters helps her out a lot, because she used to get outscaled by things like Soraka or Janna or Sona, but you're seeing a lot less of those champions. over time. And also the fact that Mikhail's got nerfed really hard. A lot less people are getting Mikhail's, which is, you know, the primary way that you would cleanse away her, her Q. So unless the AD carry or whoever she's going to hit with this gets a Quicksilver Sash, or they take cleanse or something like that, it's going to be really hard to get out of that bind. And if you don't get out of the bind, you're pretty much dead when you get hit with this. A 3-second bind later on into the game. So she's going to be super strong. I think you just go with the standard Airy, Mana Flow, Transcendent, Scorch, then Bone Plating and Chrysalis. She did get a nerf, or a buff rather, a while back. I think she was one of the people with Zyra that got like an insane mana buff. Yeah, she has 15 mana regen at level 1. So that's pretty nutty. So you can just spam your abilities on them pretty much. So that's nice. And then Ionian Boots are pretty standard. You can go Spell Thieves if you want. Nomad Medallions also acceptable. And then Zeke's Ardent Censer and Redemption are all good. You can also go for that Hourglass if you want. If your team doesn't have a lot of Initiate, then maybe being able to like bind somebody and then flash ult on them might be something you're interested in. And then Nami is still going to be up here. She could still be number 1 statistically. She's number 1 right now in terms of win rate. She is quite strong. She's just a good all-around support. She has good harass with her W early on. Her E allows the AD carry or whichever assassin's chasing somebody to stick to them. And, you know, she can buy a defensive item if she needs to. You know, she can get a Zeke's if she has to, because she isn't fully dependent on her plus healing and shielding, kind of like someone like a Soraka or a Sona, where you really have to buy the plus healing and shielding. She doesn't have as reliable of engage, which is why I have her down a little bit lower below someone like Morgana and Rakan. Morgana's is not super reliable, but it's also very low risk. If you miss your bind, you're not going to get punished that hard for it, because you don't have to miss position to try to get them. So, you know, she's okay. She's pretty good. It's like, it's one of those things where it's hard to make plays by yourself. That, like, if your team is not amazing, then it's difficult to make those plays. But she does do a lot of things. She has a lot of different capabilities in fights. I mean, she has multiple CC. She's got her Aqua Prison. She's got her Ultimate. She has her Tidecaller's Blessing. All of these are different forms of solid CC. Then she has probably the best trading tool in the game early on, you know, where you can bounce your ebb and flow off of people and trade really aggressively in lane. So I think that she's very good. She's very susceptible to getting jumped on and killed by assassins, although she does have pretty nice ranges on her spells if you play at max range. So I think that she's probably the best enchanter. In fact, I know she's the best enchanter overall right now for solo queue, just because she still is pretty versatile. She still can play fairly safe, fairly far back. Her heal has like a 725 range, and heals multiple targets. So yeah, she's still good. She's still one of the better enchanters you can play. Leona is somebody that I moved up quite a bit, especially if you're playing at like gold, silver, bronze. Leona is great right now. So part of what makes Leona great is the low cooldown and large range of her ultimate, right? So it only has a 90-second cooldown, extremely low cooldown. Very, very low cooldown. You can make plays with this all day. And it has 1200 range. So usually if they don't have flash, if you hit them with Solar Flare, then you're going to get the full combo on them, right? You're going to be able to Zenith, and then Q them, and then that's going to hit them with your W and Aftershock and all that stuff. So she does quite a bit of damage in that sense. And this also gives you what your next basic attacks gain 100 bonus range and deal extra on-hit damage, which is nice. I mean, it's not like a ton of bonus damage, but it's pretty decent. The main thing is she's just a CC train. You know, she's got 3 different forms of CC. Most of them are on pretty reasonable cooldown. Her Q's on a 6-second cooldown. You know, her E, once you level this up, which is usually what you level up second, can get down to, you know, like a 7-second cooldown or so. And then, of course, her ult was only 90 and goes all the way down to 60 seconds on the cooldown. So this just allows you to just run around and constantly make plays with that Solar Flare and that really, really long engage range. This is why I have her up a little bit more than someone like Alistar. You're going to see Alistar more in pro play because he's so good at diving. Leona's pretty good at diving as well, but Alistar, you have to get within like 650 range to do your headbutt pulverize combo to people. And that can knock up multiple people, so that's going to be really good with, like, a Yasuo. But, like, this ultimate has that 1200 range, and so that's really why I've begun to appreciate that a lot more, is that once you're level 6, you really can get on those squishy targets, right? You can get on that Misfortune, you can get on the, you know, the Jhin, people that are trying to play back. It's really hard to play 1200 units away from her in a fight. Right, now this is harder to hit if they have mobility, if they're playing like Lucian or Ezreal or something. You have to be a bit more cautious with this. But it's usually fine even if you clip them. If you hit them in the middle, it's a stun for 1.5 seconds. But even if you just clip them, a slow for 80%, you're still going to get them with the Zenith's Blade unless they flash most of the time. So, and she has really good all-in damage too, early on. You know, the magic damage off of each of her abilities, in addition to her Sunlight proc, her passive doing a lot of bonus damage as well. So she's just really great, especially in a very aggressive lane. You have a Draven, a Jhin, a Misfortune, something like that. She's going to have a lot of power. Now, historically, what has kind of been an issue for Leona is if you get camped, you know, it can be very difficult to make that work. But she's very good if your jungler camps you, right? So she is kind of a huge amplification, right? It's almost impossible to beat a Leona lane 2-on-2 a lot of the time. And if the jungler shows up, she's almost certainly going to catch you and kill you most of the time. So she's kind of like a real snowball champion. She can have a hard time if the game goes on, if your team is behind. But she does have a lot of potential to run around and make plays with that Solar Flare. Which, once you get used to this effect, it's pretty reliable. Like I said, if they don't flash or dash, even if they do flash, whatever, you've got a 90-second cooldown on it, and their flash is going to have a 300-second cooldown. So you'll have more than enough time to go by and try to get them again. So, yeah, I mean, I think she's pretty good. She can do pretty reliable AoE damage, too, with, like, the Eclipse hitting everyone on your team and triggering that Sunlight on everybody. Can be pretty strong. So, yeah, I think she's strong, and she doesn't get blown up very easily by assassins. She has a lot of defense in her kit. With the nerf to Enchanter itemization, then you really can get some pretty decent items with her, right? You can still go Zeke's. It's awesome on her because she has such a low cooldown ult, and she wants to get into melee anyway, so you're going to be doing extra damage with that Zeke's aura. She can go Knight's Vow, which gained a lot more value after the Enchanter items got nerfed. And then most games are over by then, right? You can just go Knight's Vow, Zeke's, and then you can get a Locket after that if you really need to. You know, mobility boots, just run around and take over the game. So yeah, I think she's fantastic right now. She's particularly good against things like Rakan as well because she can lock them down and make sure that they don't have a lot of that mobility. Very good against Yasuo. None of her stuff gets blocked by Yasuo. I don't even think her E does. I'm not entirely sure about her E. I don't think it gets blocked by Windwall, though. I know Solar Flare doesn't, and obviously Eclipse and Shield of Daybreak don't either. So she can get around Yasuo, she can get around Braum. So she's just pretty good overall in this meta. She does get hard countered by Morgana and Tahm Kench. Now, a lot of people aren't going to play Tahm Kench in solo queue. And Morgana is a bit more popular, so you want to make sure they don't pick Morgana into it. Like, you can work around Morgana, you know, you can try to bait out the Black Shield, you know, with your ult, and then E onto the other person that's not shielded. Just makes it really tricky. It just makes your life a lot more difficult if you're against Morgana. So I don't recommend picking her into Morgana or Tahm Kench, but other than that, she's pretty solid. Thresh is another one that can be kind of tricky if it's a good Thresh player, but she's really awesome at preying on the squishy champions. You know, she can kill Brand, she can kill Zyra. So that can make her really powerful. Okay, going down to the tier 2 here, and we'll pick it up a little bit. Fiddlesticks, you know, overall, he has been rising in popularity. I'll just say, you know, I have played him. He is interesting. I do like him. He's fun. But he is very, very, I feel like, snowball dependent. Like, your team has to have really good map position in order to make good use of him. That's what I'd think. And you always have to be in the shadows, which really limits your engage ranges. Like, you have to hide out in these shadowy places, and they really have to step out of position for you to ult over walls and kill them. Now, that can work, and that can be really high impact. You know, if you ult over a wall into a team fight, you know, you can win the fight. But if you get caught out, you're probably going to die if you're trying to roam. And if your team is behind, then that can make it very difficult to get that kind of positioning, to clear out all of those wards. And while you're trying to clear out the wards, then, you know, they might come and kill you. So, you know, he does have a really strong point-click fear. It is pretty short range. It's only 575 range. Looks like we're not going to get to see this one today. But it is 575 range. He does have really good pushing power with his Crow in the laning phase. So he is good against melee champions specifically. Just because he has the fear, he has the silence, he has the drain. But against longer range threats, you know, it can be a problem. And it can be difficult for him to get to the back line as well, unless he gets his ult off. But you have to have really good positioning to get that ult. So I feel like there's a lot more contingencies on him rather than someone like a Leona who can just start a fight with her E pretty much whenever she wants. Or not her E, but with her ult. And then E in pretty much whenever she wants. So he can do a lot of damage. He does have a really like powerful fear effect. I feel like sometimes range is an issue. And if your team is just like A-ramming middle, it can be really hard to start a fight and make anything happen. So he is good. There's just a few more contingencies with him. And when I've played him recently, like, some games he feels really good if you're jumping over walls, but other games it just feels like it's really difficult to get anything started because they are just respecting the fact that you're missing, that you could jump over a wall, or they just have really good vision control. So it's tough. The fact that you really have to be in the shadows to operate just drops him down a couple of pegs for me, but he can still be quite strong. Alistar is another one that I have up here. I said right now I'm favoring Leona just because she has longer range on that engage. But Alistar is still really strong. I mean, the WQ combo for the knock-up and then your E to stun him one more time if they don't flash or dash out can be very powerful. He has a lot of threat in lane. He does have sustain in lane to get through the poke for both you and your ally, which is nice. Then he has the Unbreakable with his ult. So that makes him particularly good for tower diving early on. So that's still really strong. I mean, he's Alistar. He's the same that he has been for the most part. For like 8 years. Really good, solid team fight engage. If you just flash WQ combo on a team fight, knock everybody up. He's very good. So he's particularly strong. He'd obviously be tier 1 if you have something like a Yasuo on your team. But he is very strong. And the fall of a lot of these enchanters has definitely boosted him up a little bit because he's not going to get outscaled as easily as he was in the past. So he does have pretty good itemization off of Zeke's, off of you know, like Knight's Vow, Locket, all of that stuff. Pretty good itemization path right now. Sona is the next enchanter. Now, I brought her up a little bit because I think her stock has risen with the fall of some of the other enchanters that have shielding, right? So Lulu's shield getting knocked down a little bit, Janna's shield getting knocked down, and then the buff to Athene's a couple of patches ago. She's one of the best Athene's users. So you can go a build like Athene's Redemption or Redemption Athene's and be very strong on her, especially if you don't have to get Ardent Censor anymore. She's one of the better champs to work around that. Ardent Censor is still very good on her if you do want to get that. With the new Athene's, you don't have to feel as bad about getting that item early, and that means you're not going to have to get tier early on, which is a huge boon, because spending 850 just for mana management feels pretty bad. So I think that's pretty good. Let me see if I don't remember if I changed the items around or not here. She still wants to go Airy, Mana Flow, Celerity, Scorchbone, Plating, Chrysalis. Yeah, let me change that real quick. Let's say Athene's Redemption, and then I wouldn't go Mikhail's anymore after that nerf. But yeah, she has really good poke in lane. If she gets those two items, that Athene's Redemption, it's going to be extremely difficult to beat her in a team fight. She does outscale most other champions. She's very reliable. She's very easy to play. She does have an AoE CC ultimate, which is really nice with her song. And then it's on a pretty low cooldown too. Right? Well, not super low, 140 seconds. So it's kind of a high cooldown actually. I thought it was 120. But it's pretty good. You know, nice AoE ability. And then just spamming, usually just rotating your Q plus your W in team fights just means if the fight goes on for 10 seconds or longer, you're just going to win. It's just too much healing, too much shielding to get through. So I still think that Sona's great, just the problem is she can get picked off by assassins really easily. You have a huge bullseye on your head. You can go something like a Zeke's if you want to, but you're sacrificing a lot because most of her power is in her plus healing and shielding, and her W scales so well off of that, you kind of have to get plus healing and shielding, or Athene's, which is effectively, extra healing and shielding because it has AP on it and that extra healing with the passive. So that's what differentiates someone like Nami. So I've had someone ask on stream, well, if I recommend, sometimes going Zeke's on Nami, why not on Sona? And the reason is, like, the healing is not Nami's full identity in team fights because she has a lot of other utility in CC, right? She's got her Q for the stun. She's got her E for a reliable slow that lasts for a pretty long time. She has her tidal wave. Whereas Sona really, like, she has her ult. Like, you can use your E to slow people in a fight with, your power cord. But it's just not quite the same. Like, she just has such high scaling off of plus healing and shielding and AP that's what you really want to do with her. So, like, if you get Zeke's on Nami, it's okay because you have all that other stuff. If you get Zeke's on Sona, you're losing out a ton of potential healing and damage by not going something like Athene's. So that's why she's down just a little bit lower. But she is very strong later. She does have really good mobility when you're going around the map with her E, just zipping around the map with your teammates. And she does have that nice AoE CC, so it's good to layer with something like a Misfortune or a Kennen or whatever if you have a team fight comp. Okay, Soraka is another one that gets a lot of press. She is pretty good. She's probably one of the champions got hurt the most by the item changes because she really has to get the healing stuff, kind of like Sona. Most of her utility later on in the game is just going to be to heal everybody up. So you really have to get a lot of plus healing and shielding with her. She doesn't really have defensive options. You can't go Zeke's. Your ult's on too long of a cooldown. And it's not something that you just want to use just to activate an item, right? You have to wait for the precise right moment for that Soraka ult. But Soraka does apply a lot of pressure early on. I would say maybe even more pressure than Sona. It's pretty close. With her E and then her Q spam, she can be very frustrating. She has very short range. So, like, her heal is only, like, 450 range, I think. Maybe 500 range. So that does make her pretty vulnerable in fights. Like, you could 550 range. It still is a lot shorter than something like a Nami, which is 725, or like a Janna shield, which is going to be 800 range. So that does make it a bit easier to hit you with area of effect abilities, and that does allow people to get on top of you a little bit better in fights. So that's pretty rough. She has a really long cooldown on her ult. 160 seconds is pretty crazy. It is a high impact ult, but I think that's definitely something to consider. So I think she is very strong. She doesn't have the AoE of Sona later on, the AoE ultimate that can lock people down. But obviously, with her W, you can do a ton of healing. It's on a 2-second cooldown later on, so it's a ton of uptime, just a massive amount of healing to a single target. Now, Sona's W can shield a lot of people and put out, like, if it's a 5-on-5, I would say that Sona's shielding and healing can just about keep up with Soraka's, but Soraka does much better against a single target with her W. So, Soraka really good, lots of pressure, lots of scaling later on. You just have to make sure that you're not going to get picked off. A lot of people like to run Barrier with her lately, has been pretty common. Barrier is the summoner spell, and then just getting a couple of defensive things, like maybe a Ninja Tabby as the boots, or a Mercurial, or Merc Treads rather, and then just Frostfang, Redemption, Ardent, Mikhail's, and then just going with the Airy Scorch package with Bone Plating and Chrysalis. So I still think she's going to be pretty good, but she is vulnerable to assassins, even with Barrier a lot of the time. But if you have a front line that can protect you, if you have, a Mundo on your team or an Ornn or something like that, she's going to get a lot stronger. Okay, Zyra I have down here just a little bit lower. She's still really strong. It's just that you're waiting on those plants a lot in team fights, and there's a lot of mobility out there these days, especially on the assassins, and it's pretty easy to dodge your E. And when your E is down, you're just super vulnerable, and that thing is on a pretty low, or pretty high cooldown rather, as are your plants. So it just feels like you have, like, really nice bursts, but if you miss your burst or they dodge it, or it's just on cooldown from something else, then there's just not a lot you're going to be able to do. So she is good. She does have more consistent poke in lane than Brand because your plants go through minions, right? You can harass people with your Q and your E through minions. Gotta go, like, cat hair or something in my nose here. Sadie, I'm gonna get you. But yeah, I just, like I said, I feel like Brand is a higher impact. He has a better panic button. If someone jumps on you in a team fight and is gonna kill you, like, your press R is a lot worse than Brand's just panic press R. And it just feels like he has a lot more uptime because his cooldowns are a lot shorter on everything, so you're not waiting on plants. So I do love Zyra. Historically, I have a higher win percentage with Zyra. I still win more with Zyra right now. I just feel like for your average Joe out there playing, that Brand's going to be a higher impact, although they do have almost identical win percentages right now. One's at 50, 1.8%, one's at 51.9. It just feels to me like Brand is just a better fit for what's going on right now, especially with all these melee champs that are becoming popular, where everyone's just spamming like 4 or 5 melee champs on their team and everyone's grouping up for the Fiesta. I think that Brand Ultimate's very, very strong, especially even if you're really behind. You know, you can always just press R and have a pretty big impact, even off of low items. Okay, Braum. Someone that rose up a little bit here. He's very good with Lucian, because Lucian's double shots proc his passive twice, so it's a lot easier to stun people with that. No, he can block a lot of the more powerful interactions out there as well, so he can block like a Brand Pyroclasm, Brand's ult with his shield. He can block like an Ezreal ult with his shield. You know, he can pretty much negate any kind of AD carry that's trying to attack people, so he can, you know, block out Kai'Sa for however long that shield lasts, 3 or 4 seconds. So he is very good against ranged champions. He's very tanky. I just feel like he just doesn't put out as much consistent like threat, especially in the laning phase. He can be pretty good. I mean, if you hit that Q on somebody in a gank, they're probably going to die, because it's going to slow them, and then they're going to get all those procs on them and get stunned. So if you have a lot of auto-attacking champions, he can be very good, because you can get those stuns off multiple times in fights. Then, of course, his ultimate with an AoE knockup is really good. I just feel like he just doesn't have as much consistent initiation or as much just firepower, especially early on. You know, having Braum roam at you and try to just, like, ult you just doesn't feel as high of impact as someone like Leona or Alistar, like, roaming around trying to make plays, or Rakan. So it just feels like he has really nice defense and peel, but he just doesn't have as much playmaking ability as some of these other champs in solo queue. So I still think he's very strong. He does have very good matchups and synergies, but it's not quite as high as a couple of these other tanks that have that hard engage. But he can still be really impactful. Now, Pyke is someone that I think is pretty good, especially if your team has a lot of damage already, so that you can clean up with your ult. He does have pretty good CC with his Q, his E. Just, it's very, very dangerous if you miss your E on Pyke. If you don't get that stun, then sometimes you can be in trouble. And if your team has a lot of AD, then it can, you know, be problematic to run Pyke as well. But he does have a lot of damage. You know, an ult with resets. I think the changes are a buff to him on this patch. If you build a lot of AD, at least, you know, in the early to mid game, his ult falls off a little bit more late game, but I still think he can be pretty strong. So try him out, you know, but you got to practice him a lot, because he does have a lot of a pretty high skill cap to him. So he can be effective. He's not going to have a super high win rate. What is it these days? It's 47, so it's going up. You know, when he was first released, it was like 38%. And then, you know, like a week later, it was 43%. And then just a little bit later now he's up to almost 48%. So he is steadily climbing. So yeah, he can be good. He's got some decent roam. He's just not as reliable, once again, as something like if you're trying to run around and roam and make a play. I don't think he's going to be as reliable as someone like Rakan, Leona, or Alistar, because you have to make sure that you hit that hook. But he is very safe in the sense that he can turn invisible and run away and get out of almost anything with his E and his invisibility. So he does have that going for him. Lulu's pretty strong. You see her a lot in pro play. Statistically, you know, in solo queue, it's going to be a lot weaker. She's only got like a 48% win rate, which isn't everything. I mean, I just talked about Braum as well. He has a 48%, right? And Tahm Kench is on here with his, you know, 47%. But I will say that with Lulu, she has a lot of pressure in lane, but a lot of people aren't playing the auto-attack style of champions that she's really good with right now. So you're not seeing a lot of Twitch, you're not seeing a lot of Kog'Maw, and so that extra, like, super fast attack speed off her W isn't as valuable as it used to be. Like, that's pretty good with Kai'Sa. if you get Kaisa together, but she's kind of, you know, susceptible to assassins as well. She does have her W polymorph. She does have her ult. You know, she can benefit from going something like a Zeke's if she has to. She can go Athene's. So I haven't tried her in a while. You know, I'll have to give her another roll. I have seen her some. I will. She's okay. I mean, I don't know. I just feel like she can get blown up, you know, by things like Brand and by Zyra in the laning phase. If she gets engaged on by Leona, that can be pretty rough. Her ranges are very short. So, like, her E, I think, is only, like, 650 range or something, which is what you use to poke in lane. Yeah, it's only 650 range, so that's part of it, and so is her Whimsy, is that, you know, she's pretty short on the ranges, but she does have a pretty low cooldown ult with only 110 seconds. Once again, you can't really make plays with her, which is another thing. You know, you can't engage and start fights with her. You can use your W to help allies start fights, but a lot of people aren't running champs that can start fights. So, you know, if your team has a Kayn jungle, a top lane Fiora, a mid lane, whatever, you know, bruisery or mage type of champion, you're not going to have engage. Like, we still aren't seeing too much of a revival of things like Skarner, Sejuani, you know, Jarvan, top lane Ornn. Like, you see that sometimes, but a lot of times it's just a lot of people playing, you know, 4 or 5 champions that are squishy, that have no CC. And so that is why having those types of engaged champions are really good right now in this meta. Having the Leona, the Alistar, the Rakan, just stuff that can start fights. So she's very good in the traditional sense if you have a fight starter, if you have a tank, and you have a traditional AD carry that really benefits from the Whimsy. But, you know, that's an if in this meta. She does have good lane pressure, although she has pretty bad matchups into Sona and Nami because they can out-pressure her early on. So, in theory, her kit is awesome. It's good. It's just right now in this specific meta, and with some of the popular matchups bot lane, it can be a little bit tougher. But she can be very effective in the right circumstances. Tahm Kench is somebody that, you know, for the normal populace is probably not going to be super strong, but he does have very good counter matchups. So he's good against Leona. He's good against Morgana. He's good against, like, Ashe, Thresh, Varus. If they do run that CC, which once again is a little bit more rare these days, but if they are running that hard CC comp, then he's going to potentially be pretty strong. So, you know, he can be good. He can be good. Now, more and more Tahm Kench, people are asking about this Glacial Augment build. I'm not a big fan of the Glacial Augment. I've tried it before. It does give you some extra slug. It's nice for, like, offensive Tahm Kench. That does seem to be what everybody's doing, though, now. So, I don't know. People here, there's a little smattering of people that are going Guardian. I tend to favor going Guardian, but I mean, this does kind of... Well, this is a lot of the same person, too. Sir Nukes a lot is, like, half of these entries. I mean, what are people doing? Glacial. Materializer, approach velocity. It does give you approach velocity and bone plating and second wind, which is nice. I mean, I guess this is nice in team fights to get people slowed consistently so that you can maybe eat them later. I don't know. Maybe it's better than I thought it is. I can go back and try it again. I haven't tried it in a long time. You know, previously I thought there were better options, but, you know, maybe Guardian's unnecessary. Or a lot worse after the nerfs, you know, several months ago. This point. Maybe it is time for Glacial Augment to give that a try again. We'll see. There apparently, you know, there are a lot of people doing that. Let me see. Huh. Now, I'm wondering how this interacts with Zeke's. Now that I'm reading it, let me see here. Now, this is an item active. Slows by 40%. So I'm curious now with... I would have to test it out and see. But if this interacts with the Glacial Augment rune, then that could potentially put slow fields all over the fight. And that could actually be pretty strong. I hadn't thought about that particular interaction with Zeke's. He's an extremely good Zeke's user, too. A lot of people aren't getting Zeke's or getting Knight's Vow here, but with Zeke's, like, if you cast your ult and then cancel it, I don't know if a lot of these people even know that interaction. I mean, I assume some of them have to know, right? They're pro players, but I don't see a lot of Zeke's on him, and he's so good with it. Because if you use your ult and then cancel it, it goes on a 10-second cooldown and activates it. So if you have your ult up, if you don't want to immediately try to, you know, teleport to somewhere else on the map with your ult, you can just press your ult and then cancel it immediately in a fight, and it triggers the Zeke's. So basically, you can use this every 30 seconds on the dot, the Zeke's, which almost no other champion can efficiently use it like that with Zeke's, outside of things like, you know, Karma or, you know, is a handful of other champions. But it's not, like, super ideal on them. But it's a very good item on him in general. Enemy for 2 seconds. They did increase. A 55% slow is quite a lot. Item active triggers your freeze ray to fire a laser that cuts an X unit line through the ground in their direction. Huh. That's interesting. So basically, if you turn on Zeke's, from what I understand, now I haven't tested this. If you have tested it, let me know in the comments. But what it seems like to me is if anyone steps in that AoE area for 10 seconds, then it's going to cast this X on that area as well and create an even larger area that's going to slow for a very long duration. So that could be a really good way to slow everybody. Especially if someone on your team is going to have a Leontries or something, that could be a really good interaction. So I don't know. I mean, I'll have to try it out with Kench. I mean, it seems to be the consensus. That's what everybody's going. So maybe I haven't tried it in a while. Maybe it's good. In this specific meta, it would be very good against Bruiser. So we'll try it out. We'll try it out. But yeah, he's primarily a counter pick champion. It's really good. That you do see in pro play sometimes, but a little bit less in solo queue just because it's hard to coordinate with your team when you have him. But he can be really strong. And then Janna is still, like, situationally pretty strong, but she's fallen a lot from Grace. She's about a 50% champion right now overall. It feels pretty bad to play her, I'll be honest, and I'm someone who's played a lot of Janna. I have, like, 800,000 mastery points on Janna or something. So it does feel really rough. Like, the decaying shield feels bad. 18 seconds still feels really bad on the early shield. You don't have a lot of interaction early. You know, you can get 3 points in W and an auto attack with Airy and Scorch and, you know, do some damage early on. But by and large, it still feels rough. Like, she can be good. She's still Janna. She can still peel. She still has a really strong, you know, ultimate. But you can't start fights. And that's the thing in this meta right now. Just to get around the just everybody A-ramming, is just have somebody that can start fights. And I just feel like with her, you're kind of just at the whim and mercy, especially when your 80 carries are one of the weaker roles right now overall. I think most games are determined by the jungler and the mid laner a lot of times, and she can't switch gears very easily and support them. I mean, she can, but she's primarily best on crit auto attack based 80 carries because she gives that flat AD. And so she's okay. You know, she's passable, but after those nerfs, it definitely feels a lot worse. I feel like if you want a team fighter, Sona's probably a better bet, although Janna can be good. Janna's not very good with Zeke's because you know, blow people back and you have a really long cooldown ult. She's not that great with Knight's Vow. She's not that great with Athene's. So I feel like if you want peel, I'd probably just go for a tank. You know, I'd probably go for like a Braum or a Tahm. If you want peel right now, if you want sort of the team fight, scaling superiority, I'd probably go for Sona or Soraka. But Janna, she can still work. You know, in the right circumstances, she can still work. So if you're against, like, hard engaged champs with gap closers like a Zac or a Lee Sin or something like that, then she can still be really strong. But I think she's definitely a bit more situational than she has been in the past. Then finally for the honorable mentions, and we'll finish at about an hour or so. Once again, still aiming for that elusive 30 minutes, but, you know, trimming it from an hour and a half to an hour I think is pretty decent. Nautilus is still pretty good. He's risen up quite a lot, you know, I think. He still doesn't have a great win rate overall, but I think a lot of people just aren't used to playing him. I think these are people that are just kind of experimenting. He almost never gets played. He does have a huge hitbox on his hook, so his hook is a lot easier to hit than someone like a Thresh or a Blitzcrank. It can't go through walls, though, which is an issue. He does have a point-click ult, which is quite strong. I don't remember if they lowered the cooldown on it or not. Let me see. It does give them a lot of reaction time. I actually haven't upgraded the thing on him yet in a long time, because I only upgrade for the tier 1 and the tier 2 units. And he hasn't been tier 1 or tier 2 for a long time. But he's close. I mean, he's close to breaking his way into tier 2, I think. Let's see if it'll show us. Maybe not. Okay. This, I believe, does this show the skills? I don't think this is going to show the skills. It might. I don't remember the cooldown on the ult. Maybe it is 120 seconds. It might be 140. I'm not sure. His win rate has gone up a lot on this patch. So, you know, since 628, people were playing it a little bit more. He does have that fat hitbox. He does have pretty good wave clear with his E. He does have that ultimate, which is a point click. It is fairly short range. I think it's like maybe 800 range on that point click, and they have time to react to it because it takes a little while to get over there. But he can be pretty strong in team fights. The main thing that holds him back is his defensive steroid is pretty weak compared to something like a Leona or an Alistar. You know, his W just is not that big of a shield, so he is surprisingly a bit squishier early on than you would suspect. And then his E costs a lot of mana. Like, that's the thing that you level up first. It doesn't do very much damage compared to some of the other options, once again, on someone like a Leona. He's not gonna put out as much damage as she does early on, but it is nice wave clear as well. So he's okay. I just feel like he got nerfed a lot back in the day. He was played top lane maybe 3 years ago at this point, and they nerfed him a lot for top lane and just haven't given him a lot of buffs back. I think they should just buff the mana cost, just lower the mana cost by like 5 or 10 on his E, and he would be a lot more viable. I don't think he would be as oppressive top lane because now you have things like Conquer, and then Camille and Fiora are a lot stronger. So I think he needs just like maybe 1 or 2 more buffs before he becomes like super mainstream and supplants, you know, some of these other engagers, but he's still pretty good. Thresh, if you're very good on Thresh, it's a great meta for him. He's just really hard to play. The itemization and runing is not amazing on him. His damage is pretty low compared to other engage options. And it's pretty conditional, you know. You got to be able to hit those hooks later on. So Thresh can be very strong. I just feel like just people just raw outpower him. People who use some of the runes or the current items better than he does are just going to have a lot more power than he does. But he has a ton of utility still. He's still very good. If you are a good Thresh, Thresh is a great champion right now. So, you know, if you're a great Thresh, he could definitely be high tier 2, maybe even tier 1 if you're excellent on him. But his numbers are still a little low, and we live in just a raw power meta. There's just so much damage everywhere, and if you're just not putting out the big numbers, it can be tough. Blitzcrank is someone who's really strong. He's just very one-dimensional for me. It's like you hit your hook, and that's great, or that's it. Like, you don't have anything else, and you know, I'd rather just play something like a Leona that's going to have a much more consistent type of engage, or a Rakan, or an Alistar, rather than being at the whim of the hook. But if you are really good at hitting those hooks, he can be excellent. Now, if you miss a hook in lane, you are extremely vulnerable. It has a very long cooldown, it costs a ton of mana, and the enemy team can punish you a lot if you miss that hook. So he is very good, but he's also very, you know, one-dimensional, so it's okay. Tarek got nerfed really hard on this patch. I still have him up here because he's still an awesome team fighter. He's great with certain comps, but, you know, nerfing that ult to have it take however long, like, it's like 160 seconds or something now is a really long time. It may have even nerfed it to 180, I can't remember. It's a really long time to wait on that ult. He's very short range, very conditional. I'd rather, if you want to just play a team fighter, I'd rather just play something like a Sona or a Soraka, or something like that. But he can be very strong. And then we're sort of getting into the boutique champions after this. You know, the Veigar, the Bard, the Karma. Like, these champions can be really good. Zillion has a high, like, win rate as support. Theoretically, I just think he has a lot of problems. Doesn't have good runing and itemization. Now, one sort of honorable mention that I will talk about just very briefly is Gragas. I've had a lot of questions about this. We have seen this some, like, in the LCK. You know, he still doesn't have a great win rate as support. The win rates aren't everything, but it's just important to keep that in mind. He's still sitting like a 46% win rate, although he's not played that much. So what's up with Gragas, just really quickly, and we'll call it a video. Let's see here. Where are you, fat man? It's not going to show us his abilities, but I've played him some, and I'll tell you, like, his ultimate is very cool. The cask, the knockback, if you time it correctly. It's not only CC, but it knocks people back. It's very easy to mess up, though. If they dash or flash, you can actually knock them away to safety with it, or if you just misclick it or mistime it. So it's like, it's very easy mechanically to mess up, and it's fairly easy to outplay as well by the enemy team if they're watching for it. But it can blow and knock people out of position. It is on a pretty short cooldown, like 120 seconds. It doesn't do a ton of damage, but that's pretty good. His body slam is decent engage. It's kind of short range once again, but it can peel. It can knock people out if, you know, Zach's trying to fly in or Lisa's trying to fly in. It can peel those people off. It's only a 1 second stun, but it's pretty nice. Barrel roll can push lanes. It gets kind of expensive, though. Gragas doesn't have great mana regen. So it's okay. Once again, it's kind of slow. It's fairly easy to dodge with the barrel roll. Then his W is, it's kind of, I don't know, it just feels worthless to me a lot of time. Like, you do get some damage reduction for like 2.5 seconds. You do an auto attack. It can feel good. It feels very clunky because it has like a 0.75 channel time. It's like almost a 1 second self-stun, so that you can get a 2.5 second, like, you know, mediocre damage reduction with a little bit of extra damage on it. If it didn't have the channel time, it would feel really good, but right now it just feels awkward a lot of the time. So he's okay. I'm just not sure, like, where I would want to play him over something else, because there's just a lot more room for error and a lot more ability for the enemy to counterplay what you're doing. I mean, if you flash body slam and then knock somebody back with, like, your R, sure, that works, but you could also just flash engage with Rakan, or just flash, you know, WQ combo with Alistar, or, you know, flash with anything and engage, right? So he does do some pretty decent burst damage, especially if he gets a little bit of AP. I just don't feel like he does enough. Like, the knockback, or the knock-up, is pretty good with Yasuo. So I'll give him that. You know, it's a pretty long range. I don't remember the exact range on his barrel thing. I think it's like 800 or 900 range with his ult. And so if you knock a bunch of people up with that, you know, you could potentially knock like 5 people up with that. And then you have the Yasuo go in. Like, that can be strong. So that's a powerful interaction. And I haven't watched when people have been picking him in the LCK, but I would maybe assume that Alistar would be banned and they would have a Yasuo on their team to pick him. I would have to go back and see specifically why they're picking him. But I have seen him some. So he does have some cute interactions with that, but he's pretty high skill cap. You'd have to practice him a lot to be able to hit the ultimate correctly, but he can be pretty strong. So we'll see how it develops. You know, he's on my watch list for honorable mention, so we'll see how he goes. Now, Shin also could deserve to be a little bit higher. I have a support video on Shin if you want to check that out on the channel. The loss of Banner makes me want to pick Shin a little bit less. I think his itemization's a little bit more wonky, but, you know, he can't use Zeke's that well. He has a really long cooldown ult. He can use Knight's Vow and Locket all right. Zeke's, he also doesn't get any benefit out of the mana from that. So I feel like he was a lot more popular in pro play on patch, 8.12 because of Banner, or 8.11, whenever, before they got rid of Banner. And he's also a flex pick, so he could be played top lane, he could be played mid lane, and he just kind of fits into that kind of wacky pro meta right now where everybody's running around doing kind of goofy stuff. He fits into that, whereas in solo queue, it takes a bit more coordination if your teammate runs out while you're ulting them or whatever. He can still be strong. He does scale pretty well as the game goes on in terms of just being able to sit there and raw auto-attack people. So, he's all right. He's all right. I'd probably feel more comfortable having him as an honorable mention, but it's possible he could be, like, as high as tier 2. But yeah, that's it. I want to go ahead and end this, see if we can get done around like hour 10 here. At least it's not an hour 30 anymore. We're trimming it down a little bit. And then next week, I'm going to see if I can figure out some video editing, or over the next couple of weeks, figure out some video editing and use that with the tier list in the future, see if I can trim it down even more. But it's always tough because I don't want to sacrifice the depth of the content. So anyways, thank you all very much for tuning in. If you enjoy this, please be sure to check out the channel, The Strategy Professor. On YouTube, be sure to like, subscribe. If you've watched several videos and you really enjoy it, it does help other people find the channel, and helps out a lot. And then come check out our live stream. Comes on every night around 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'm very interactive. I try to answer any questions in the chat that I can. We have a good time. It's a really friendly, welcoming community, unlike a lot of those other just random, stream chat rooms out there. It's very cool. Lots of regulars. Lots of great people. So just come in, unwind after work, or when you're getting up in the morning if you live in Europe. Come have a good time with us. It'll be great. So thank you very much. Have a good day, and I'll see you next time.